Thank you very much, Greg, for that amazing introduction. Before I kick off, I think I have seen a little bit of the conference today, but I just want to recognise Greg and the team from EntreConf and Media Clash for all the incredible work that they do. So I think they deserve a quick round of applause. Yeah, bringing this sort of cross-sector, cross-discipline opportunities together, I think, is incredibly valuable. This idea of a pitch and my background and how I think through a consumer lens won't necessarily be completely relevant to every business here in the room, but hopefully there are some nuggets of the things that I will share that you will all find relevant and useful, and then hopefully we can get into a fun Q&A discussion, which Greg is kindly going to moderate at the end. This cartoon in the New Yorker a few weeks ago made me laugh, because I think a few years ago a conference probably would have talked about Web 3.0 and crypto a lot, and then now it's going to be all about AI. And there is a joke to that, but of course in all jokes there is an element of truth, and I think we'll touch a little bit on what that means in a moment. So first of all, let's try and analyze what is a pitch. Well, we can also analyze what it's not. And in the 30-something years that I've been in work, I've spent a lot of it in large companies, and culture comes from how companies navigate these four different things, particularly the three on the right, the difference between a presentation, a meeting, and a chat. And in my experience, the vast majority of companies get that wrong. And I think one thing that if you were to take away anything from what I talk about today as you're scaling your businesses is really think about the culture that your company stands for, particularly when you get your teams together and how you operate and talk and communicate and collaborate. Because most companies don't understand the difference between a meeting and a presentation, where you get a bunch of people into a room and they all present to each other without actually taking notes, without actually having an agenda, without actually having action items to take away from it. And a lot of company culture is wasted in these kind of sessions. Similarly, as a manager, the difference between a meeting and a chat, when you're actually working with an individual on a one-on-one basis, there's a lot that can come from a culture and how you think about bringing your employees and your colleagues along for the ride. But we're going to focus on the left-hand side of the chart today in what is a pitch. And what I'm talking about is really through the lens of an investment pitch. Pitching somebody or a company for money, for support, for investment to take an idea to market or to get investment at an equity basis. And a pitch is simply a compelling short story backed up by data. And this is not my unique thought. This was borrowed from, I think, somebody in the VC community many years ago. But it makes a lot of sense. It's telling that story. It's creating that vision, that excitement, that storytelling, but also backing it up with the data to prove that you know what you're on about and that your vision is correct. I also think it's really important that in a company, as a founder, and within your circle of people in your organization, to have in your mind and on your laptop 3 versions of your pitch at all times, and to deliver the right version of the pitch to the right audience at the right time. And this is, again, something that I have seen, and by the way, I've made this mistake myself many, many times. I've walked into a room and given the 1.5-hour version of the pitch when, in fact, all I was needed to do was the 15-second version. And I think having clarity about which version you're going to give, the 15-second version, 15 seconds is a lot longer than you realize. If you think about how long the news headlines take on the BBC News at 10 or listening to the news or the sport headlines, you can pack a huge amount into 15 seconds. And at an event like this, that's the version that should be coming out of your mind and out of your mouth with clarity. And please make sure that all members of your team give the same version of the 15-second pitch, because that is often the case where you get a little bit of dissonance between variations on the pitch. The 15-minute version is probably the first filter. That's maybe where you meet somebody in a VC fund or a potential investor or a potential partner, and they might be the first line of defense before you get into, hopefully, the later version of the presentation and the deeper insights into your company, into your vision. Again, that 15 minutes you can pack an awful lot into. And then ultimately, if you're going to get in front of the investment committee, as we heard a little bit about earlier in the sessions today, then it's the 1.5 hour version. And then actually there's a fourth, which I'm not touching on today, which is when you come to exit your business, there's probably a 1.5 day or a 1.5 week version where you're actually getting into super deep dive on the data. But we'll focus on these three for now. And the other thing that I would say from bitter experience is that there is a saying, particularly in kind of Silicon Valley, the problem of death by PowerPoint, where you force a presentation onto somebody and expect them to like what you say. When in fact, really a perfect pitch is a conversation. It's a conversation that leads to an investment. And it is where you are engaging with your potential investor and really getting into the deep understanding of your business, but also a deep understanding of them as an investor. And this is something that I'll touch on in a minute, but it's worth pointing out that just in the same way that you as an entrepreneur have a goal of getting an investment, VCs themselves are tasked on making investments. They have to see a large number of companies in order to get to a small number of potential investments down to a very small number of actual investments. So it's in their best interests to actually see you as well. Oh, we've got a formatting issue on this slide. That's interesting. Okay, well, let's see. Okay, that is not... Right, let's work this out. So, bit of real-time slide making here. So there are four elements to a pitch. There is the product. There are the people. There is the positioning, meaning the market, the opportunity that you are going after, and then the final one is the process. The product is the what. What are we actually building? What is the service that we're making? What is the product that we're making? The positioning is, what is the market that we're going after? What is the opportunity that we're going to go after? And how do you tell that big picture story to a potential investor? The people, obviously, is the team. And a lot of early stage investment, and bearing in mind that in my background, I'm a very early stage investor. I'm not really a late stage private equity type investor. I'm interested in investing in people like Rupert, for example, who you heard from yesterday. I'm fortunate enough to be one of his shareholders. And it's because of his track record and his ability and his proven ability that made me want to invest in his company. More so than necessarily what he was doing or the market he was going after, it was actually the people. But depending on where you are in your sector and depending on where you are in your cycle, it may be that the product and the positioning is more important than the team, so you will change the emphasis of this. The one thing which I find most pitches lack is the how, the process element at the bottom. And that is something which I learned a lot from our CFO at Google, Ruth Porat. She talked about runway lights, this idea of if you are going to show me a business, show me the lights down the runway that demonstrate that we're making progress against that goal. What are the key metrics that we're going to operate towards, and what is the indicators that will tell me as an investor that you are achieving those goals? And I think it's really helpful as an early stage business to lay that out. It won't be 100% accurate, and obviously the further out will be less accurate, but at least it gives the investor a sense of understanding that you as an entrepreneur know what your business metrics are going to be and also how you will measure progress against them. And we heard that from Evangelos earlier on, which I thought was really interesting. When you are in front of a VC and a private equity investor, particularly ones with a large portfolio, make sure you know what their portfolio is, because it's very easy to walk into a pitch where actually you're pitching something that is very close to one of their existing portfolio companies. And so make sure that if you are in an adjacent swim lane to that existing portfolio company, clearly state the differences, clearly articulate why you are unique and why you are different. And it shows an understanding of the marketplace and the fact that you've done the research of that particular VC or private equity company. The second one is obvious, know your numbers. We've all watched Dragon's Den and watched people trip up on that, but make sure that you do have all the numbers in your deck, but also use the appendix to hide all the details in until you need to get to them. One thing that I've seen very effectively in pitches is where you have typically the CEO or the leader of the business giving the pitch, but you have somebody alongside them who has almost like the index of the deck. And so when a question comes up, they can say slide 24, and you just go straight to slide 24 because that's where the answer to that particular question is. It's really useful to have a co-pilot in these situations. In a smaller company, it might be your CFO, it might be your operations head, it doesn't matter, but somebody that can be that yin-yang while the leader is giving the vision. You have somebody who can actually get to the detail specifically. The next one is something where actually the previous slide demonstrated I failed on, which is control the room and make sure you test your slide deck before you put it in front of people. But it's, you laugh, but actually there are so many times when I've seen presentations go wrong where people are plugging in a laptop, trying to get the power to work, trying to get the cable to work. Oh, can I borrow your USB-C? And then you've lost, of those valuable 15 minutes, you've lost 5 of them faffing about. And it's a silly thing, but it actually does leave a bad taste. And I'm sure, you've seen that slide and you think, well, that wasn't particularly professional. But do control the room. It's business storytelling meets theatre. This is actually a key part of doing a pitch, is to make sure that you are able to have all of your key players know their part, know their role, know what they're talking to, which slide they're talking to. As I mentioned earlier, move the detail slides into the appendix, but know where they are so you can get to them. And be clear about whether you are leaving materials or not up front, but do still bring printouts with you. A lot of VCs like to write notes on things, even if you're going to take those materials away at the end. By the way, in all of my time doing this, I've never seen a VC sign a non-disclosure agreement ever. So don't even bother to ask, would be my experience on that. If you have a protected intellectual property idea, great, but I don't think a VC is, in this day and age, likely to sign an NDA. There may be some exceptions to that, but it's pretty unlikely. And then I thought this was an interesting takeaway from a couple of the comments and talks this morning about, even if the answer is a no, what are the actions that you can take away from the presentation and from the discussion with the investor? You will learn more about the sector that you're in through this external perspective. I thought Evangelos talked about that very clearly, about how each time he pitched, he learned something more about his own business and ended up doing a pivot in the middle, which I think was very valuable advice, and I would definitely follow up on that. And then clearly, I didn't do the last one, which I didn't rehearse. Otherwise, I would have seen that previous slide. So I'm just going to grab a water and then talk to, I think it's probably something in the region of 2,000-3,000 pitches that I have received over the years. When I was at PlayStation, we met with every developer, showed them the new hardware, showed them the new software. We would ask them to present to us their games that they were thinking about doing, and we would help them with their choices. And so it's probably in the many thousands that I've either given or received in some way, shape or form. Some of them have been amazing, which I'll come to in a minute. Some of them have been less so. And I thought I'd spend a few moments talking about that because it would be fun. Some of you in this room will know this, but in the early days of the games industry, we used to go to the Consumer Electronics Show, which was in the States twice a year, summer in Chicago and winter in Las Vegas. And the summer of 1991, I was working for a company called Mindscape Software Toolworks, and they had a booth at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. And if you've ever been to one of these events, they have meeting rooms on the stands, and because the stands are expensive, the meeting rooms are necessarily quite small. And in this particular stand, the meeting room was so small that if you were sat around the table, your knees would actually be touching with the person opposite you. So one thing which happened at that show was somebody walked up to the stand and said, I've got a game on the Amiga, which was at the time a popular 16-bit computer in particularly in Europe, and I'd like to present it to your company. And because I was based in Europe at the time, and that's where the Amiga market generally was to be found, I was asked to take the pitch from this individual. And he walked in, he had his presentation and plugged in his computer onto the screen. And he said, look, it's work in progress. It's an early version of the game that I'm working on. I said, that's absolutely fine. I'm very used to seeing, work in progress, early games. The game was curious in that it was based on characters from the Bible. Now, I don't have a problem with that, but it was a somewhat niche market at the time. And he said that he was still working on the sound for the game, but every character in the game was going to have a unique song. And I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting. I thought that was quite cool. He then proceeded to sing each of the characters' song, bearing in mind my knees are touching his underneath the table, and he is about that far away from me. So one takeaway from that experience is don't make your audience feel uncomfortable while pitching the presentation. Needless to say, we didn't move forward with that particular opportunity, even though it was a beautifully crafted idea. The next one is another example of control the room. At PlayStation, we used to invite companies in to come and present, particularly when they were a new publisher who wanted to be licensed to publish on PlayStation. And this was a startup that was VC funded. They flew en masse from New York to San Francisco, where I was based at the time. And the CEO stood at the end of the room and gave his presentation. And he was very compelling, really compelling. He had a really strong vision for what he wanted to do, for the products he wanted to bring to market. And as I'm sat at one end of the meeting room, about 3 or 4 down, he brought about 10 people with him to this presentation. About 3 or 4 people down on the right-hand side, there was somebody who looked like they were about to have a heart attack. They were in deep trouble, sweating bullets, cartoon sweat coming out of their head. And it turned out, as the CEO got to his kind of crescendo of his presentation, and he said, I'd now like to invite John to show the video. And John had left the video on the plane. And so they were not able to present the video. And sadly, nothing to do with that pitch, but sadly they ran out of money and they went bust. And I don't want to overplay the significance of that, but I suspect that there was some element of a challenge inside that business where they were not prepared and they didn't bring the right materials to enough meetings, and they ran out of cash quite quickly thereafter. So sadly, these meetings can be a matter of life or death, particularly as we heard earlier. You've got 2 months to raise some more money. The next one, I apologize in advance, does involve a gratuitous name drop, but I'll do it anyway, which is in the early days of PlayStation 2, the first PlayStation had been a huge success, over 100 million units sold. And Hollywood, for the first time, was getting really quite excited about the games industry as an opportunity. And we had a series of meetings with various Hollywood types about how they could bring their properties to PlayStation and to the games industry. And there'd been a New York Times article which had talked about PlayStation 2 having, quotes, Toy Story-like graphics. Now, if you remember Toy Story, the movie, when that came out, that was quite a bold claim. It wasn't really true either, to be perfectly honest, but at least it was a nice quote from the journalist in the New York Times. And that got the attention of somebody called Ed Catmull. Now, if you know anything about computer graphics, Ed Catmull is like John Lennon. You know, he's like he's like Pele and John Lennon combined. He is like the superhero of computer graphics. And Ed Catmull contacted us, and anyway, we arranged a meeting. He wanted to come in and see the prototype under wraps PlayStation 2 before anybody else got to see it. And of course, we were delighted to have him come into the office and have the opportunity to present to him. The day before the presentation, we got a call from Ed's office saying, would it be okay if Steve Jobs came along as well? And Steve Jobs was the CEO and chairman of Pixar at the time. So, yes, I think we can probably make room for Steve Jobs to come into the meeting as well. So Steve came to the presentation, and I gave my 15-minute pitch on PlayStation 2 with a demo, and Ed asked some very sort of deep technical questions about computer graphics, as you would expect from somebody of his nature. And Steve just stood there or sat there at the end of the room and at the end of the presentation just shook his head. He said, there's no new technology there, not interesting to me. At which point I then got into a fairly robust argument with him. So don't argue with your audience unless they're called Steve. I have this great memory of my head of R&D with his head in his hands as I'm just like having this ding-dong argument with Steve Jobs. And his point was the G4 Power Mac, if anybody knows their Mac history, which was the most powerful Macintosh at the time, was more powerful than the PlayStation 2. And technically he was sort of true in some areas. But I made the point that you sell a G4 Power Mac fully spec'd for about $2,500, and we're going to sell a PlayStation 2 for $300. And he said, I don't believe you. You're not going to sell it for $300. There's no way that will happen. He was right. We ended up selling it for $100 by the end of its life. And then, you know, it was interesting clash of cultures between a company that at the time was purely a hardware business. Bear in mind, this was before the iPhone. This was just them selling Macintoshes and I think early iPod. But they didn't participate in the software ecosystem. But our business model obviously was software and hardware combined. So it ended up being a fun conversation, and one of my more memorable experiences was to spend time with him. I found out later that the fact that he argued was actually a sign of interest on his part. If he wasn't interested, he wouldn't have argued. But there you go. But it was a great opportunity and a great honor to have met him. So for those of you who know a little bit about the games industry, this is a character from a game called Little Big Planet. And I mention this because this is the star of one of the greatest pitches I ever received. And this was from a small startup company called Media Molecule, who we had been incubating, although we didn't have a formal incubator in the sense of a VC-type incubator. We had funded them to get to an early point in the game and to get to a presentation and to a demonstration of what their vision was. And this is important, not because of the game necessarily, but about the underlying technology and their creative approach to telling their story, which I'm sharing because I think it might be relevant. When they came in to do the pitch for this game, rather than using PowerPoint, they actually wrote their own communication tool using the game engine. So you could actually play the whole presentation while you were watching it. On the left is the original pitch, and on the right is the final game. And you can see that there is a huge jump in quality between the left to the right. And one of the things that they were incredibly successful at doing, Alex Evans and Mark Healy, the two main founders of Media Molecule and others, was that they were able to share their vision of what the final journey would look like. They were able to show those runway lights that said, this is where we're taking this idea, and they took us along for the ride. So we believed, I believed. I was then in a conversation with them about what that future would look like, and what should have been a 1-hour meeting ended up being a 4-hour meeting because it ended up being a conversation. So to my earlier point about making it a conversation, that was them bringing me into the process. And we ended up creating something, or they ended up creating something that was incredibly successful, and I think still today one of the more unique products, and definitely the best pitch that I had ever received. Again, this one, I show this screenshot not because I expect you to know the game, but because it's an example of a failure and a pivot. So actually, for special bonus points, does anybody know what this game is? I will be amazed if anybody does. No, good. So this is a game called Gunshine. Does that give any ring any bells? No, it won't, because nobody played it. It was on Facebook prior to really the explosion of the App Store and the iPhone, and particularly the iPad. And the company behind that was a company called Supercell. And I invested in Supercell in 2010, not because of that, but because of their demonstration of the underlying technology beneath the game that convinced me that if this was not successful, it would be quick for them to pivot and cheap for them to pivot. And that's indeed what they did. And they ended up having Clash of Clans, Boom Beach, and Heyday, the top 3 games in the App Store. They had position 1, 2, and 3 worldwide at some point, and ended up creating a company with multiple billions of value. So that is an example, I think, of demonstrating to a potential investor that while your idea might be your vision of the idea, it's also having the underlying technology and capability to pivot if you don't have the right idea. If your market entry point is slightly wrong, but your underlying technology is right. And that was one of the things that gave me confidence as an investor in that company. So in the sort of remaining few minutes, what about a next generation pitch? Well, I'm sure we're all consumed by the idea of AI. This is what the internet tells me AI looks like at the moment. And I think that it is relevant. I think it is relevant to all businesses, but with a key metric attached to it. So I think a lot of VCs will be asking, what's your AI strategy? I think to say, well, we believe that AI will help us drive this metric down in cost by 20% a year over the next 5 years, or we think we can accelerate our time to market by X%, or whatever the key metric associated with it is, it should be a key part of your communication in your pitch. Just saying we have AI is not sufficient in its own right. It has to be linked to a key metric, in my opinion. We're also about to enter an age which probably will be beyond my lifetime, but will definitely be within the lifetime of many of you in this room, and certainly our children, which is where AI becomes like this, total driver of lots of new innovation and lots of new businesses. This was an image that was created by Midjourney just by typing in that text at the top left. So you type in a robot working on a laptop, realistic, and that was spat out automatically. No human being was involved in that. I'm curious to know what the robot on the bottom left was doing with the cup of coffee, though. I don't actually know how that would be helpful to the robot. But anyway, you get the idea that there is generative AI is a new era for computing, and I think is a new technological revolution for the world, which will be incredibly powerful and impactful on all aspects of our lives. I was born just after that picture was taken and just before that product shipped. That's the Intel 4004 microprocessor, which created the computer generation. There we go. There's my timeline in the middle somewhere. But we're about to enter into a world where this becomes a reality. If anybody knows what that is a quantum computer. It's not something that will be readily available tomorrow, but within our time frame, within our horizon, we'll be able to see the impact of this combined with AI having a transformational impact on all of humanity. So I'm incredibly optimistic about what that will mean for all of the technology businesses and all of the product businesses that the world will potentially build. And then if this comes true, then it's even more exciting, which is a nuclear fusion reactor, which would potentially give untapped energy to all of humanity. So there's a lot of things that are happening which are incredibly exciting, which I think will power the rest of the human race. But for now, I wish you all a very perfect pitch. Back to Greg.
Thank you.
So something that begins with a pitch ends with untapped energy for all of humanity. My God, what a canvas you've just etched or sketched or some such. I want to pick a few questions and then throw it open. And I'll start with this, Phil. And pitching, as you discussed, of course you're talking about investment, but actually anybody involved in sales or a commercial world, many of these lessons absolutely apply. So when you are pitching or indeed receiving a pitch, how far does it matter how you pitch rather than what you're pitching? I'll give you a specific example of this, and it's the Dragon's Den that you just referenced briefly earlier. Levi Roots, one of our previous EntreConf keynotes, he serenaded the dragons. He wasn't going very far at all. He bust his numbers in front of them, but he decided to break out into song. Maybe don't go that far, but how you pitch and your personality, how material is that in your experience?
Well, I can definitely attest to don't sing to me. That doesn't work.
Well, you said.
Given that. I think I mentioned Dragon's Den. You mentioned it there, Greg. I mean, I think that's mainly an entertainment program and probably less about investing. So I'll kind of ignore that.
But it's a style point.
No,
the personality.
Yeah, I think the style matters because, first of all, an investor is backing you as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a visionary, as somebody who will have the human energy, the sort of capital inside you to drive a business forward. Rupert's a good example of that. Many of you have done it, and amazing. All credit to you for everything that you have achieved. And I think it's important that you get that across in the presentation. But not everybody is going to present like a rock star. Some people will present more prosaically, and that's fine too. I think so long as the story is there, the people, the product, the process, and the positioning, so long as you have those four elements clearly articulated in the pitch, then it's okay. It doesn't require dancing and singing.
Certainly not singing. We've got that point. But so it's quite a key point there that as an entrepreneur, your personal style is your personal style. And I just to pick a point and extend it, it's be yourself. The authenticity of entrepreneurialism, the credibility, the belief that this is something I wish to partner.
And that's the key word, is credibility. And it's being credible relative to your professional history. You may have come out of academia, but that still means that you have credible experience in your field of expertise, or it might be credibility from the products and services that you have built for other companies. And it's how you articulate that. I think that is a key word.
Talk to us a little bit more about empathy, that anybody involved in selling really needs to see through the eyes of someone that they are talking to, rather than simply, this is us, do you want it? How does that empathy process work differently for an early stage investment where you may well know partners within an industry sector, as distinct from a VC or a more distanced approach of Series B rounds or whichever it might be?
Yes, I mean, in fact, I was having this conversation over dinner last night. Was the idea of early stage investors, potentially from an angel network, often will come from your industry circle or from founders who have exited, who deeply understand your product and your sector. And then the later stage Series C, D, E private equity investors, they're less interested in the sector, although there are clearly some PE specialists, but they're more interested in the numbers. They're going to be a more objective, metrics-based decision where they're looking for that hockey stick inflection point about to happen, and they want to be the ones to pour the fuel on the fire and accelerate the company to the next level. And I saw that with Supercell. Some of the investors who came in much, much later, all they were interested in was the customer lifetime value and the key metrics of the business, and they were like, "Yep, that hits our model. Fine. Here's $200 million." They were all like that.
Yeah, exactly. Would they were all like, but also perhaps the distant difference between in your mind as an entrepreneur, you believe, you love, you've sweated, you've created. This is your thing, and in someone else's mind, the bigger scale you go, it's risk mitigation is what they want. It's not the dream. It's the sausage, not the sizzle, or whichever.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I having spent a lot of time with private equity investors, they get excited about a sector. They get excited about people. They get excited about products just as much as anybody else does. It's just their bar for investment becomes so much higher that it has to be more objective and less subjective as a result.
Yeah, I guess that's what it's wanting to do. Let's open it to, and although this is, and you've heard the canvas, you've heard about different levels of pitches, any form of pitch, commercial pitch as well as investment pitches. So let's take a question here, then I'll come to this secondly. So yeah.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for that. My name's Dave Mason, and we do presentation training for leaders and individuals in business who are trying to get their ideas over. So I'm interested to know from your perspective, having seen thousands of them, whether or not the words and how people, and Greg referred to this, articulating a point is as important as something that I feel people have lost often in telling their stories in business, which is show and tell, giving us a feeling of what it looks like, a picture, a video, using more interactive materials in the pitch so that we can see what you're talking about, not just hear what you're talking about.
I think that's crucial in consumer businesses, particularly in the sector where I have spent all of my career, where you have to demonstrate some vision of what the final product may look like. And so, yes, I completely agree with you. Fortunately, the cost of production of those type of assets has come down significantly over recent years. And the other benefit of what you describe is that can stay in the room long after you've left the room. And it means that it can then talk on your behalf. And just actually a voiced over presentation with maybe some simple interactive click-through can be just as powerful as a 20-page PowerPoint.
I'll give an example of that. Again, it's a little bit parochial, but it's about our EntreConf awards. First time round, it didn't exist. We were pitching and explaining something, didn't exist, and encouraging people to enter a sponsor, whatever it might be. Second time round, we've got the assets, we've got the video. You can tell the story. There is an emotional crescendo to that.
Well, I can give you a good example of a pitch of a product that didn't exist, which was something that I'm going to embarrass Greg and a few other people in the room, but at PlayStation, Future Publishing did the official PlayStation magazine, and the magazine didn't exist. And so Future made a copy of the magazine to show us what it might look like. We had another advertising agency pitch our business at PlayStation, and they had 2 days left at the end of a shoot. So they filmed an entire commercial for us. We didn't even use them in the end, but they filmed an entire commercial that was pretty good for putting out on television if we had so wished, if they had been successful with the business. So I think, finding those ways to be entrepreneurial, to tell the story in as visual and compelling a way as possible helps.
To picture paint as much as it's envisaging, isn't it?
Yeah, but obviously that doesn't apply to every sector and every category.
We had a question over here,
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a really interesting talk, Phil. Thank you. Of your 4 Ps, there was a 5th one which I thought might be there, which is purpose. If you've got a pitch of a business which is very impactful, which means a lot to you, would you not focus much on that?
I think that's a great question. And do you mean purpose in terms of its purpose to the world, or
Probably, yeah.
I think that's a great takeaway, and I would, if the slide had worked, I would have added that in. I think that's for sure. And I think actually in many businesses today, the role that they could play in giving back or promoting or identifying particular issues in the world, I think is an important factor. It's not often an investable factor, though. And so I think if I'm narrowing down, the context of a pitch being a VC type pitch, I don't know that all VCs are going to be so focused on that as a KPI. Whereas I think your employees and your customers will, more so.
Another question or two. Dan, you're an experienced man. You've built a very successful business, sold it successfully, and now you're an investment advisor in multiple areas.
Okay, thank you. I do a little bit of angel investing, and everything, or you see lots, and they're all quite sexy, and you think, oh, go on then.
Is that it?
That's it. No,
Go on.
There is a question. There's a question.
Normally
you have
more
to
formal than, oh, go on.
Okay. You have to turn them down, or you have to turn some down. You must have turned down some that, in retrospect, were absolute winners.
Whilst you're thinking which one to select, not many.
Kind of, why do you think you missed them? Right, if you know what I mean. Because there's a thing where you look at it and you think, nah, there's a reason I'm not going to do that. And then you think, whatever the bias was or whatever the flaw, or you just, sometimes you just don't have the time to think about it, so you just pass. But where you have and you said no and you were wrong.
There's a famous phrase in the music industry about the man, and it was a man, who turned down the Beatles. What was anything vaguely equivalent, Phil, you would like to confess to? There's this lovely confidential environment.
Yes, there's lots that I've missed, but sometimes it's not necessarily because of the way that the idea was presented at that point. Maybe it was because you had a conflicting or competitive product in your portfolio that you were trying to emphasize first. But yes, there's lots of examples of that. I think probably my biggest miss was when I heard, and to be fair, this is, I never got the pitch, so I never even was invited to invest, but I knew that Demis was starting a company called DeepMind, and I think I probably should have been a bit more assertive in meeting him to talk about that. Flip side of that is I do know the story about how Mitch Lasky invested in Snapchat, and he was driving his daughters to a football match, and they were using Snapchat in the back of the car, and he was like, "Oh, what are you doing on your phones?" And this thing called Snapchat, everyone's on it. He dropped his daughters at the football match, got on his phone, and flew down to LA the next day.
Did he pick his daughters up after?
No, I believe so. I believe so. But the apocryphal story is that he flew down on a Sunday and was knocking on the door of the entrepreneur, the team behind Snapchat, in order to make an investment, and that turned into a multi-billion-dollar payday for Benchmark.
I'll give you a failure. We weren't an investment company, but this company came to me when I was at Future in maybe 1994, and he said, "This is the principle of it. Imagine, here's this. There's these spiders. What? These spiders go out and they crawl and they find information and they bring it back." I said, "What? That is a search engine." What? That was pre-Google. It was a company which then became Autonomy. And I said, it's not our business anyway, but I don't understand it. I have no idea what you're on about. And there is a precise example of turning down the Beatles because, whatever, it happens. Phil, let's come to this point. We're nearly at the end of our time. Simplistic stuff, as ever from me. Do you prefer to pitch or be pitched?
Oh, great question. I mean, I think that the most successful are where those two worlds actually meet in the middle, where you are being pitched, but then you are like, oh, that's interesting, that's exciting, and you're adding value, and then it becomes this conversation, and then you feel like you are invested in the idea, and then you are, yes, the money is secondary. It's actually because you want to see the thing be successful. But I think now in the stage of my life that I'm in now, I like to be on the receiving end of the pitch because I like to help companies and I like to see businesses be successful and entrepreneurs become successful. So I think right now I would say pitchy rather than pitcher.
Very good. On that, we're going to end. I mean, just think of this. This is a man you've had a flavour of it. It's only a soupçon of the experience that Phil has had of working with, hearing from, helping develop ideas entrepreneurially, primarily in the video game space, but elsewhere as well. Learning from that and imparting today, giving us his time, his insights, his wisdom on your behalf. Thank you so much to Phil Harrison. Thank you.
Thank you.